She stood in that cold courtroom, hands trembling, heart shattered, as the man she had loved for 12 long years signed the divorce papers right in front of her, with the woman who had stolen everything from her life sitting proudly beside him. Everyone thought Angela would break down that day, but no one, neither her husband nor his mistress, could imagine what the judge was about to say next. What happened inside that courtroom turned betrayal into regret, and regret into a lesson they would never forget. She stood in that cold, echoing courtroom, hands trembling, heart pounding so hard it almost drowned out the sound of the judge shuffling papers. It was supposed to be a normal hearing, just signatures, just words on paper, just another broken marriage being finalized. But to Angela, it wasn't just anything. It was the end of 12 years of love, sacrifice, and dreams. 12 years she had carried on her shoulders alone. Across the room sat David, the man she once believed was her forever, the man who promised to grow old with her. But the worst part wasn't even seeing him sitting there. It was seeing the woman sitting beside him, Vanessa, the mistress, young, perfectly dressed, wearing a smile that was meant to hurt. She sat close to David, her hand lightly touching his arm as if to say, "I've won." Everyone thought Angela would cry that day. Everyone thought she'd break down. But no one, neither David nor Vanessa, could imagine what was about to happen next. What happened in that courtroom would turn betrayal into regret, and arrogance into shame. Mike voiceover. Before we begin this emotional story, if you believe that justice always finds its way and broken hearts can rise again, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Gentle Words, where real stories touch the soul. Angela had always been the kind of woman who gave everything for her family. She worked as a nurse, spending sleepless nights in hospitals so that her husband could build his career and their daughter could have the childhood she never did. She believed in love, she believed in promises, she believed in David. They met when she was still in college, both young and full of dreams. He used to bring her coffee to late-night shifts and promise, "I'll take care of you forever." She believed him then, but promises are fragile things when they're built on lies. For months, Angela had felt something shifting. David no longer looked at her the same way. He came home late, smelling like expensive perfume she didn't wear. He laughed at texts he refused to show her. When she asked if something was wrong, he always snapped, "You're overthinking. I'm just tired." So she stayed quiet. She trusted him. She kept building a future while he was already living another. And then came the day her world cracked open. It was their 10th wedding anniversary. Angela, exhausted but happy, came home earlier than usual, holding a cake, balloons, and a little wrapped gift. She tiptoed to the bedroom, ready to surprise the man she loved. But when she opened that door, she froze. Her husband wasn't alone. A woman, a stranger with long dark hair and red lips, was wrapped in their bedsheets. David jumped, panicked, trying to explain something unexplainable. Vanessa smirked, fearless, almost proud. Angela didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just stood there, tears burning in her eyes, the sound of the rain outside blending with the sound of her heart breaking. She left that night with nothing but her dignity. The days after the betrayal were quiet and cruel. David moved in with Vanessa within weeks. Photos of them appeared online like Angela never existed. Laughing in restaurants, traveling, acting like a couple who hadn't destroyed a family. Angela cried alone at night, hiding her pain from Naomi, their 8-year-old daughter. She tried to be strong. She tried to keep moving. But then came the divorce papers. And worse, David didn't just file them. He brought Vanessa to the first hearing. The courtroom was crowded. David wore a sharp suit. Vanessa, in a tight red dress, sat beside him like she owned the place. Angela walked in quietly, wearing a simple black dress and a calm expression. Her heart was heavy, but her head was high. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. David smirked when he saw her. Vanessa leaned closer, whispering something that made him chuckle. The judge, an older woman with stern, wise eyes, noticed everything. David's lawyer began to speak. He listed their assets, their house, their cars, their bank accounts. David wanted half the assets, and the house. He wanted shared custody of Naomi. Vanessa played with her hair, confident, believing everything was already in their favor. Angela didn't interrupt. She didn't beg. She let them talk. But when the judge turned to her and asked, "Mrs. Williams, do you have anything to say?" she stood up slowly, the quiet strength in her eyes silencing the room. "Yes, Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but powerful. "I have a lot to say. I gave this man 12 years of my life. I carried his dreams on my back while working night shifts at the hospital. I raised our daughter when he was too tired to care. I believed in him. I trusted him. I loved him. And this is how he repays me, by bringing the woman he betrayed me with into a courtroom meant for truth and justice. I don't want revenge. I want what's fair. I want my daughter to grow up in a home built on respect, not humiliation." The room went silent. Vanessa's fake smile faltered. David shifted uncomfortably. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Williams," she said sharply, "it's one thing to end a marriage. It's another to disrespect your wife in a court of law by bringing your mistress into these proceedings. You've shown a level of cruelty I will not overlook." Angela's lawyer presented proof. Bank statements showing her financial contributions, records of her long hours, proof that she was the primary caregiver. David had little to fight with except his ego. The judge spoke again, her voice like steel. "Mr. Williams, I've seen many cases like this, but rarely have I seen such arrogance. You left your wife for another woman, and then walked in here expecting to walk away with everything she built. That won't happen." David's face tightened. Vanessa's hand slipped from his arm. The judge continued, "Based on the evidence, the court awards the marital home and primary custody of your daughter to Mrs. Williams. You will pay alimony and child support. Your visitation will be reviewed after 6 months to ensure stability. And for the record, bringing your mistress to this courtroom was not only disrespectful, it was foolish." David jumped up. "You can't do that." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, Mr. Williams. This is my courtroom, and actions have consequences." Vanessa stared at him, suddenly realizing this wasn't the glamorous life she had imagined. Her lips tightened. David sank back down, humiliated, the confidence draining from his face. Angela didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply breathed for the first time in months. After the verdict, David and Vanessa stormed out of the courtroom. Vanessa hissed at him in the hallway. "You told me she wouldn't get anything. You said it would be easy." David's face burned red with shame. For the first time, he felt what it meant to lose something real. Angela walked out quietly, holding the documents in her hand. The breeze outside brushed her face softly, and the weight on her shoulders finally felt a little lighter. A reporter standing nearby asked gently, "Ma'am, how do you feel after all this?" Angela turned, her eyes shining, not from pain this time, but from strength. "I feel free," she whispered. "I feel like I finally remembered who I am." The weeks that followed weren't easy, but they were hers. Naomi ran into her arms every afternoon after school. The house was full of warmth again, and Angela began to rebuild, not just her life, but herself. She painted Naomi's room a new color. She started reading books at night instead of crying. She began to smile again. David, on the other hand, learned the weight of regret. Vanessa's charm faded when money got tighter. The house was gone. His image was cracked. He tried calling Angela late one night, but she didn't answer. She didn't need his apologies. She didn't need his closure. She had found her strength without him. Vanessa left him a month later. She didn't sign up for a man drowning in his own mistakes. David sat alone in a cheap apartment, surrounded by empty beer cans, staring at old photos of Angela and Naomi. He realized too late that he had thrown away something pure for something shallow. Angela, meanwhile, stood in front of the mirror one morning, looking at herself with quiet pride. She wasn't just a woman who had survived betrayal. She was a woman who had risen. She whispered to her reflection, "This is my beginning, not my end." Mic voiceover. If you believe that justice can rise from heartbreak, that dignity is power, and that strength speaks louder than revenge, then let Angela's story remind you, betrayal might hurt, but it can never define you. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Gentle Words for more stories that move your soul. Angela held Naomi's hand as they walked to the park that evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in warm colors. For the first time in a long time, she felt peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from someone else loving you, but from loving yourself enough to stand tall. She knew the road ahead would have challenges, but she also knew this time, she would face them as a woman who had learned her worth. The gavel had struck weeks ago, but its echo still lived in David's mind. Every night, when the world grew quiet and his phone stopped buzzing, the memory of that courtroom played in his head like a punishment he couldn't escape. The moment the judge spoke those words, "Your actions have consequences, Mr. Williams," something inside him cracked. For the first time in his life, David felt what it meant to lose not just a home, but the one person who ever truly believed in him. Angela, meanwhile, began to rebuild her life piece by piece. Not in a dramatic rush, but in the quiet, steady way strong women do. Every morning, she woke up before the sun, packed Naomi's lunch, braided her hair, and kissed her forehead before school. The house that had once felt like a war zone now felt like a safe place again. The walls were still the same, but the air was different, peaceful, free. Mic voiceover. If you believe that healing after heartbreak is real and strength can be found in silence, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Gentle Words. This chapter will remind you that true strength doesn't shout. It grows quietly. Angela had painted the living room a soft warm color, the kind that made the space feel alive again. She put away every trace of David. His photos were boxed up. His favorite chair was gone. Every reminder of pain was gently erased, not out of hate, but out of self-respect. Her heart had been bruised, but it wasn't broken anymore. Naomi, though young, had noticed the changes too. She clung to her mother a little tighter now. She asked questions sometimes. Why doesn't Daddy live here anymore? And Angela would kneel, hold her small hands, and say softly, because sometimes, grown-ups forget how to love the right way. But Mommy will never stop loving you. And that was enough for Naomi. David's life, on the other hand, began to unravel the way a loose thread slowly destroys a fabric. Vanessa left him 2 months after the divorce. She couldn't handle his bitterness, his financial struggles, or the fact that he no longer had anything to offer except regret. Their once glossy love had turned dull, heavy with resentment and silence. She packed her bags one night, leaving behind a note that said, "This isn't the life I signed up for." David tried pretending he didn't care. He tried going out, drinking with old friends, living like the man he used to be. But nothing felt the same. Every place he went reminded him of something Angela once did for him. How she used to pack him breakfast for work. How she would wait at the door when he came home late. How she always believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. And that's when the regret became unbearable. He tried calling her once. Just once. It was late, the kind of night when silence stings. He stared at her contact name for 10 minutes before finally pressing call. The phone rang, but she didn't answer. He whispered into the empty room, "Please, Angela," but no one heard him. Angela saw the missed call the next morning. She stared at it for a few seconds, her heart fluttering, not from longing, but from the ghost of a feeling she once had. She put the phone down and went on making breakfast for Naomi. The past had already taken enough of her. It didn't deserve another second. Meanwhile, Naomi's school was preparing for its annual recital. She had been practicing a little poem for weeks, her small voice echoing through the house at night as Angela watched with soft, proud eyes. On the day of the performance, the auditorium was filled with parents, some holding flowers, some clapping excitedly. Angela sat in the third row, wearing a simple but elegant dress, her smile glowing. Naomi stepped onto the stage, nervous but determined. She looked into the crowd and saw her mother. That was all she needed. David, sitting in the very back, had come quietly. He hadn't told anyone, he just needed to see his daughter. He didn't know if Angela would even want him there. He sat alone, feeling the weight of everything he'd lost pressing down on him like a stone. When Naomi started her poem, about bravery, kindness, and love, David's throat tightened. She spoke about a hero in her life. And to his shock, she didn't say, "Daddy." She said, "Mommy." Greater than, "My hero is strong. She never gives up. She makes me feel safe. She tells me that even if someone leaves, love doesn't. She is my heart's home. My hero is my mom." The audience clapped. Angela's eyes filled with tears. David lowered his head, feeling a pain deeper than anything he'd ever felt before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was the unbearable weight of knowing he had broken something he could never fix. After the recital, parents flooded the stage. Naomi ran into Angela's arms. "Did I do good, Mommy?" She beamed. Angela held her tight. "You were perfect, baby. Perfect." David watched from afar, unsure whether to approach or disappear. Angela saw him, just for a moment. Her smile faded, but not from hate. From a quiet, distant sorrow. He took a step forward. "Angela," he whispered. She looked at him calmly, holding Naomi close. There was no anger left in her, just an ocean of things unsaid. "David," she answered simply. His voice cracked. "I miss her. I miss you. I know I ruined everything. I know saying sorry won't fix it. But I needed to be here today." Angela nodded slowly. You missed two. Many days before this one, David. I know, he said, his eyes red. I was a fool. I thought love would wait for me even when I broke it. She looked at him, not as the man she once loved, but as someone she used to know. David, I don't hate you. I just don't belong to that story anymore. Naomi deserves better. I deserve better. He lowered his head, unable to argue. He knew she was right. She let Naomi walk ahead to talk to her teacher, then turned back to him. You still have a chance to be her father, David. Not through empty promises, but through actions. Start being present, not for me, for her. His eyes filled with tears. Thank you, for not shutting me out completely. I'm not forgiving you, she said softly. I'm freeing myself. She turned away, her hand gently resting on Naomi's shoulder as they walked out together. The image of them, mother and daughter, hand in hand, radiant and strong, stayed burned into David's mind like a scar that would never fade. That night, Angela sat by the window after putting Naomi to bed. The moonlight poured into the room, painting the walls in silver. She thought about the woman she used to be, the one who cried herself to sleep. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, softer, wiser. She whispered to the night, I survived. And for the first time, it didn't sound like a battle cry. It sounded like peace. David, alone in his apartment, stared at an old photo of the three of them. His chest ached, not because she hated him, she didn't, but because she had learned to live without him. Regret is a heavy thing. It comes too late. Angela made herself a cup of tea, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. She didn't need anyone to fix her. She had already fixed herself. She had rebuilt her heart, one quiet morning at a time. Naomi tiptoed out of her room, her tiny voice whispering, Mommy, are you okay? Angela smiled and pulled her into her lap. Yes, sweetheart, Mommy's more than okay. Naomi laid her head on her mother's chest, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat like a lullaby. You're my hero, she mumbled sleepily. Angela kissed the top of her head. And you're my reason. Mic voiceover. If this story touched your heart, remember, real strength doesn't come from the people who hurt us. It comes from the way we rise after they do. Hit like if you believe in new beginnings, and subscribe to Gentle Words for more stories that remind us. Even broken hearts can bloom again. As the night grew quiet, Angela didn't feel pain anymore. She didn't feel anger. She felt free. Her story wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about rebirth, and that was the most powerful ending of all.
Everyone on that flight thought it was just another spoiled rich man's problem. A billionaire father, a baby crying non-stop, and a plane full of annoyed passengers. Angry airplane, but no one knew that the person who would silence those cries wasn't a doctor, a nanny, or the flight crew. It was a poor, elderly black woman sitting quietly in the back. And what she did next left the entire plane speechless and in tears. Heartbreak sparkles. Before we begin, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to Gentle Words for more heart-touching stories. The first-class cabin of Flight 247 from New York to Paris was supposed to be silent, peaceful, and luxurious. The dimmed lights gave everything a soft golden glow, the smell of freshly brewed coffee floated in the air, and the sound of engines was like a steady whisper beneath the seats. But then, cutting through the calm like a blade through silk, came a piercing cry. High, sharp, relentless. A baby's cry, not just a whimper or fuss, but a full-throated, soul-shaking cry that refused to stop. In seat 1A sat Richard Wallace, a man who owned private jets, five-star hotels, and entire companies. But today, despite all his wealth and status, he looked small, a tired father clutching his 8-month-old baby boy, Caleb, who was screaming as if the world had turned against him. Richard's hair was slightly messy, his tie loosened, and his hands trembled a little as he rocked the baby back and forth. His expensive watch reflected the cabin lights, but none of his money could buy him silence or peace in this moment. Richard whispered, almost pleading, Please, Caleb, please stop crying. His voice cracked slightly. He had closed billion-dollar deals with a calm face. He had stood on stage in front of thousands with confidence. But right now, alone with his crying child, he felt helpless. Caleb's little fists punched the air, his face was flushed red, tears streaked down his soft cheeks, and his cries grew louder and louder. A woman sitting a few seats away rolled her eyes and muttered, This is first class, not a daycare. Another man took off his headphones and sighed dramatically, shaking his head. A couple leaned toward each other and whispered, "Billionaire can buy a jet but can't calm his own baby." Richard heard those words. Every one of them stung like a needle in his heart. He wasn't just dealing with the baby's cries, he was dealing with his own guilt. His wife, Amelia, had died giving birth to Caleb. He had been a powerful man, but the day she left this world, something inside him broke. Since then, every cry from Caleb reminded him of how alone he was. How unprepared, how lost. He had tried to fill that emptiness with the best nannies, expensive lullaby machines, baby whisperers, and luxury comfort, but none of it could replace a mother's warmth. Flight attendants rushed over with worried faces. "Mr. Wallace, would you like us to bring a bottle? Perhaps some warm milk?" one asked softly. Richard shook his head. "I've tried everything. He doesn't want anything. He looked down at the small, screaming face in his arms. Won't stop." Caleb's cries didn't just echo in the cabin, they filled Richard's chest with pain. He wanted to be strong. He wanted to be the kind of father Amelia would have been proud of. But tonight, at 35,000 feet, he felt like a failure. Meanwhile, far behind him in seat 31C, in the cramped economy class, sat Mrs. Ethel Johnson, a 74-year-old black woman with warm brown skin, gray hair tied into a neat bun, and kind eyes that carried years of stories. Her hands were rough from years of cleaning homes, cooking, and holding children. Her faded blue dress and worn shoes showed a life of simplicity, not wealth. She held a small, old handbag with a photo of her grandchildren tucked inside. This was her first plane ride in more than 40 years. She had saved for this trip for 2 long years, working double shifts just to afford the ticket. She was on her way to Paris to see her granddaughter, who had just given birth to a baby girl. When she first heard Caleb cry, she didn't feel annoyed like the others. She didn't roll her eyes or sigh. She simply closed her eyes and listened. A mother's ear doesn't just hear sound, it hears need. She recognized the rhythm of that cry. It wasn't hunger, it wasn't pain, it was loneliness. She had heard the same cry from her own babies many years ago, in a tiny wooden house where love was plenty but money was scarce. She whispered softly to herself, "Oh, little one, you're just scared." As the cries grew louder, Ethel's heart grew heavier. She could feel the judgment in the air, the whispers, the irritation, the way people acted as if a baby's pain was an inconvenience rather than a cry for comfort. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt. Her joints ached as she stood, steadying herself on the armrest. A flight attendant noticed and hurried over. "Ma'am, you need to remain seated. We're mid-flight." But Ethel placed her wrinkled hand gently on the young woman's arm and said in a calm, motherly voice, "Child, let me help that baby." There was something about the way she said it, gentle but firm, like the kind of voice that had quieted many storms. The attendant hesitated. After a moment, she nodded and stepped aside. Ethel walked slowly toward the first-class cabin. Heads turned as she passed. Some people frowned, others whispered. Richard looked up, startled, as he saw the elderly woman approach. "Sir," she said softly, "may I hold him?" For a moment, Richard froze. He didn't know this woman. But there was no judgment in her eyes, only kindness. He whispered, I've tried everything." His voice broke a little. Ethel smiled gently, extending her arms. "Sometimes, sugar, they just need a heartbeat." Without another word, Richard carefully handed Caleb over. The moment Ethel's warm, weathered hands cradled the baby, the air changed. Caleb's tiny fist stopped thrashing. His cries softened into whimpers, then hiccups, and then silence. Complete silence. The cabin froze. The passengers who had been complaining a moment ago leaned forward in surprise. A man who had rolled his eyes now stared in quiet awe. A woman whispered, "Oh my God." Ethel sat down in the empty seat beside Richard, rocking the baby with the ease of someone who had done it thousands of times. She began to hum an old church lullaby, soft and low. It wasn't a song from the radio or a fancy baby sound machine. It was a song that had comforted her own children through storms, through hunger, through long nights. Caleb rested his head on her chest, his tiny fingers clutching the fabric of her faded dress. He listened to her heartbeat, steady and warm, and drifted into calmness as if her arms were the safest place in the world. Richard stared, his eyes filling with tears. "How did you?" he whispered. She smiled softly. "I've held a lot of babies in my time. Babies don't care about money. They just want to feel safe." Her words hit him harder than any boardroom speech, any headline, any deal. For the first time in months, Richard felt something melt inside him, a mix of grief, love, and relief. For the rest of the flight, Ethel held Caleb like a grandmother holding her own grandchild. She hummed, whispered little stories, and even made the billionaire laugh. People who had been annoyed minutes earlier now watched with soft smiles. One woman whispered to her husband, "She's like an angel." Richard couldn't take his eyes off her. He wasn't just seeing a kind woman. He was seeing something money could never buy: real love. When the flight finally began to descend, Caleb was fast asleep in Ethel's arms. His breathing was steady, his cheeks soft and peaceful. Ethel gently handed him back to Richard, who held him with new tenderness. As the passengers began to disembark, Richard turned to Ethel with tears in his eyes. "Thank you. I don't even know how to repay you. I can give you anything. A house, money, whatever you want." But Ethel just shook her head slowly and smiled. "No, sugar, I don't need a thing. Just promise me one thing. Don't let the world raise him. You hold him. You love him. Because that's all he'll ever need." Richard swallowed hard. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. Not like a businessman, not like a billionaire, but like a father. He reached out and held her hand. "I promise." Ethel smiled and patted his hand with a warmth only a grandmother could give. "Good. Then he'll grow up just fine." As Ethel walked back toward the terminal, most of the passengers didn't even know her name. But Richard did, and in his heart, he knew he would never forget that moment. The woman everyone ignored had done what no amount of money could. She had reminded him how to love. For weeks after the flight, Richard Wallace couldn't stop thinking about her. Ethel Johnson. That name was etched into his mind like a quiet hymn. The image of her weathered hands gently holding Caleb, the sound of her humming that lullaby, the way his son, restless, inconsolable Caleb, had melted into calm against her chest. It wasn't just what she did. It was what she gave him in that moment. She gave him hope. In the days that followed, Richard found himself holding his son differently. Not like something fragile he might break, but like something precious he wanted to protect. He started humming at night, awkwardly at first, out of tune, but full of love. He no longer left Caleb with nannies during the nights. He held him, he rocked him, he listened to his tiny heartbeat and let his son's breathing guide his own. In the quiet hours of the night, when Caleb's soft breaths warmed his chest, Richard often whispered, "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson." But he couldn't let her just disappear. She had been a stranger on a flight, and yet she had changed the course of his and his son's life forever. One evening, after putting Caleb to sleep, Richard called his assistant and said, "Find her." "Sir, who?" "The elderly woman from flight 247. Her name is Ethel Johnson. She sat in economy. She lives in the US somewhere. Find her. I need to see her again." For most people, that would have been nearly impossible. But Richard Wallace was not most people. When he set his heart on something, whether a business deal or a lost piece of hope, he found it. Within a week, they had located her. She lived in a small house in a quiet neighborhood in Georgia. Her life was simple. She lived alone, spending most of her days tending to her small garden and watching her grandchildren on weekends. She was still the same woman who had boarded that plane in her faded dress. Richard didn't send her money. He didn't send flowers. He didn't want to turn a moment of kindness into a transaction. Instead, one warm afternoon, Ethel opened her door and saw a tall man standing on her porch holding a little baby, the same one she'd cradled in the sky. "Mr. Wallace," she said with wide eyes. He smiled gently. "Please, call me Richard." She laughed softly, covering her mouth with her hand. "I didn't expect to ever see you again." Richard shifted Caleb gently in his arms. "I couldn't forget you. You saved us that night. You didn't just calm my son. You reminded me what love looks like." Ethel's eyes softened. "Oh honey, all I did was hold a baby." "No," Richard whispered. "You held my heart." They sat together on the porch, the warm sun casting soft golden light on the faded wooden steps. Richard told her how that night had changed everything. How he'd learned to hold his son, not as a duty, but as a father. How he'd stopped hiding behind work. How he'd started living again. Tears shimmered in Ethel's eyes as she listened. That's what love does, child. It wakes us up. From that day forward, Ethel became more than just a stranger he met on a flight. She became family. Richard started visiting her every month with Caleb. She cooked for them, told stories about her youth, taught him old lullabies. And Caleb? Oh, Caleb adored her. Every time he saw her, his tiny arms reached out for her as if he knew exactly where home was. Richard wasn't looking for a replacement for Amelia. He knew no one could ever replace the love of his late wife. But in Ethel, he found something he didn't know he was missing, a gentle anchor. A grandmotherly soul who loved not because of who he was, but simply because love was her nature. Time passed like soft wind. Caleb grew from a baby into a bright, curious little boy. He learned to walk on the same porch where Ethel had first rocked him. He learned to speak his first words, Mama, for the mother he'd never known, and Nana, for the woman who gave him comfort. Richard often sat on the porch watching them together, the poor elderly woman and the billionaire's son, and thought, this is what matters. But time, as gentle as it can be, is also unstoppable. Ethel grew older. Her hands that once held Caleb so firmly began to tremble a little more each year. But she never stopped holding him. Not once. One cold winter, when Caleb was 8 years old, Richard got a call. Mr. Wallace, it's about Mrs. Johnson. The words that followed hit him like a storm. She was in the hospital. Her heart was weak. Richard dropped everything. The meetings, the business trips, the world, and flew to Georgia with Caleb. When they entered her hospital room, she was lying in bed, frail but smiling the moment she saw them. There's my boy, she whispered, her voice soft but warm. Caleb rushed to her side, holding her hand tightly. Nana, don't be sick. Ethel chuckled weakly, brushing a small curl from his forehead. Oh, sweet boy, I've had a long, beautiful life. Don't cry for me, smile for me. Richard sat beside her, his throat tight. He wanted to say so much. Thank you, please don't go, your family, but no words came. Only tears. She squeezed his hand gently. Don't look so sad, sugar. We all go home someday. He whispered, you gave us everything. You saved us. No, she smiled, you saved yourself the day you chose to love that boy. I just reminded you how. A single tear slipped down Richard's cheek. Ethel turned her gaze toward Caleb, who was hugging her arm like he used to as a baby. Listen to me, little one. You're going to grow up strong, kind, and good. And when you love people, love them the way you were loved. That's all the world needs. He nodded, tears streaming down his little face. I love you, Nana. And I love you more, baby boy. That was the last conversation they had. Ethel passed away 2 days later in her sleep, peaceful and warm, just as she had lived her life. Her funeral was simple, just as she had wished. But what she never expected was the crowd that came. Dozens of people she'd touched over the years. Families she'd worked for, children she'd cared for, and right in the front row sat a billionaire and his little boy, crying not for a woman who had wealth or fame, but for a woman who had love. Richard made sure her grave was surrounded by flowers all year round. And on every anniversary of that day on the plane, the day their lives changed, he and Caleb would fly back to Georgia. They would bring her flowers, sit by her grave, and tell her all about their lives. As Caleb grew older, Ethel's words became his compass. He studied hard, grew into a kind young man, and whenever life got hard, he remembered the warmth of her arms. Years later, when Caleb graduated with honors, he walked up on stage and gave a speech. His voice trembled as he said, "Greater than, I don't remember my mother. She passed away the day I was born. But God didn't leave me alone. When I was just a baby crying on a plane, a woman, a stranger, held me. Her name was Mrs. Ethel Johnson. She wasn't rich, she wasn't famous, but her love changed my father's heart. Her love changed my life. She taught me that family isn't just blood. It's love. Pure, simple love. And because of her, I'll spend my life giving others the same love she gave me." The entire room stood in silence, some with tears in their eyes. Richard, sitting in the front row, pressed a hand to his heart. He saw in his son everything Ethel had hoped for. That night, after the celebration, Caleb and Richard stood together under a quiet sky. Richard whispered, "She'd be so proud of you." Caleb smiled softly. "She's with us, Dad. She never really left." Richard nodded, and in the wind that brushed gently against their cheeks, they both felt her, not as a memory, but as a heartbeat.